Hello, my friends. Welcome back to my channel. Today, we're talking books, okay? One of my favorite topics outside of Disney. These are all the books that I read in the month of September, and then I'm going to briefly tell you guys the books that I hope to read in the month of October. If you've never been to one of my book videos before, welcome. In this, I generally give like a small little summary of the books that I read and then my thoughts on them. I do not give any spoilers, so you don't need to expect any of those over here. And I am not a fancy certified book reviewer. The book reviews that you're going to get here are just how my heart feels once I turn the last page. You know, once I hit the end, what my thoughts are on the book. So there's no fancy rating or anything like that. If you're interested in seeing more up-to-date reviews from me, you can feel free to follow me on my Bookstagram account. I will put that on the screen here and then I'll link it down below, as well as my regular Instagram account if you want to see my just regular daily life. And I think that's it. We're going to go ahead and get into the video. So the first book that I read in the month of September was called Chasing the Boogeyman. And this was by the author Richard Chismar. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. This book was really cool. So it's set in 1988 and it's a small town in Maryland, and the bodies of a few girls have been found and it's disrupted the entire small town. So it's basically like a police investigation, and you are seeing all the photos and behind the scenes information and the processing of everybody involved with it. So this one, I gave it a 4 out of 5. For me, I am not, unfortunately, I really wish I was, I'm not a true crime book fan. I'm more of like a psychological thriller, fast-paced suspense type of fan. With this one, I felt like, because here's the thing, when it comes to true crime and some detective novels, I feel like there's so much detail and not a lot of dialogue. And I'm the type of person, I like heavier dialogue. This book, I feel like, found a very good balance. Like, I feel like it could reach people that like detailing, and I feel like it could reach people that like dialogue. I felt like it was a perfect marriage of that. For me, I felt like the beginning part of this book, it took me a long time to get into it because there's a lot of detailing in there that I just felt like was kind of unnecessary. And it felt like the subject of the book was giving too much information about themselves versus the crimes and the victims, if that makes sense. So that was the only reason it was a 4 out of 5. But other than that, I think it's a really good book for the spooky season, and a really good book if you're into true crime or any type of like investigation, detective, all of that good stuff. The next book that I read was called Best Frenemies by Max Monroe. And this one I gave a 4.5 out of 5. This one is a spicy romance, and I gave it a 1.5 out of 5 on the spice factor. Now this one follows Katie, who is a math teacher. She's very by the book, and she has to share a classroom wall with Mac, who is not at all by the book, and he's a music teacher. She's constantly getting on him and on the principal because it sounds like a zoo in his classroom, and it's already hard enough to get her kids to pay attention to their math lessons. They end up accidentally renting the exact same condo during a school break and are forced to end up vacationing together. So this one I loved because it's an enemies to lovers, and enemies to lovers is my favorite trope, but it's hard to do, I feel like. This one felt very real. What I love about Max Monroe, if you haven't read her books, or I should say their books, because it's actually an author duo that writes these, they take the ridiculousness of romance novels and they kind of throw it at you and make it fun. It's like they know it's ridiculous and they lean into it and they own it with pride. You know what I mean? So it's just like the fun of it isn't taken away by trying to be something it's not. Like, it's ridiculous. You know what I mean? It's a spicy romance. A lot of the stuff is like based in realism, but it's really not. You know what I mean? That's what I love about it. I thought this book was really adorable. I loved the whole thing. I loved the ending. It just felt like a very large romance. I felt swept away by the story. So the next book that I read was another thriller, and this was called Never Lie by Freida McFadden. This one I gave a 3 out of 5. Freida McFadden wrote one of my favorite thrillers, which was The Housemaid. But this one, I could not get into it. So this one follows Trisha and Ethan, and they're about to start a new chapter in their life, and they decide that they want to purchase a home together. Well, they end up stumbling upon a listing for a home, and they go to see it in the middle of a snowstorm, and they get trapped. Well, once they're trapped in their home, they realize that it's owned by a famous therapist who has gone missing and has been missing for years. So as they're spending the night there, Trisha stumbles upon a secret room that has a bunch of evidence that may lead to the discovery of what happened to the therapist. For me, it just felt like there was so many twists and turns in this book that it ended up just feeling chaotic, and I just couldn't like catch my breath during this book. I was interested enough to find out the ending, but it just never fully, like, I was never fully invested in it, and I could not stand the characters. The next book that I read was called The Billionaires Ex Fianc, and this was by Anika Martin, and this one I gave a 4 out of 5, and Spice I gave it a 2 out of 5. This one follows Rex, who finds himself in the need of a fake fiance. And he puts his best friend in charge of picking somebody and tells him that it needs to be somebody that he would not find attractive, somebody who is not his type. That way he can avoid falling for them and complicating the situation. So his best friend ends up picking out his hairstylist, who is the last person he could imagine doing this job. This book was adorable. It was really cute. I really enjoyed the characters, but I felt like it was like very chaotic. The story was a bit outrageous. There's some suspense that's happening and it kind of gets dramatized and it's a little cringy and cheesy at times. But overall, if you're just looking for like a fun romance and you're not thinking of it too seriously, this would be a good option for you. Okay, the next book that I read was my favorite read of the month, and it was Things We Left Behind by Lucy Score. This one I gave a 5 out of 5, and for Spice I gave it a 2 out of 5. This is part of the Knock 'Em Out series. If you haven't read the Knock 'Em Out series, stop watching this video. Just kidding. Don't leave. We need you here. But put it on your to be read list, okay? Because the Knock 'Em Out series from Lucy Score is one of my faves. I didn't love the second book, but I feel like you kind of need it. But the first book and the third book, phenomenal. This one follows Sloane and Lucien. Is it Lucien or Lucien? We're gonna go with Lucien. They have hated each other since forever. They used to be best friends. Nobody in the town knows why they hate each other because they won't talk about it. It's something they don't talk about. But they find themselves in a position where in order to make sure that their loved ones are safe, they have to form an alliance. This book was just the perfect wrap up. I don't know if like you guys remember like back in the day when like we'd watch, or it might happen now, I don't watch a lot of TV shows now, but when like a series finale is happening and like the episodes leading up to the series finale, they kind of start giving that like going away party to like all of the characters, and you just get to spend a little bit of time with them. They kind of highlight them, and then I don't know how to explain it, but there's just some type of energy leading up to a series finale, and I felt like this book captured that energy. It just felt like the perfect send-off to this entire series. Sloane and Lucien were like epitome enemies to lovers. The reason for them hating each other was so valid, but I felt like it was such like, it was like a very healing process to get through for both of them. There was a lot going on. Definitely look up trigger warnings for this book if you have any topics that would make you uncomfortable. But overall, I loved this book so much, and I would definitely recommend reading the entire series. Okay, the next book that I read was called Rewrite Our Story by Kat Singleton. This one is a spicy romance. I gave it a 2 out of 5, and for Spice, I gave it a 3 out of 5. So this follows Marigold, who is back in her hometown for the worst reason, and it's because her best friend's mom had just passed away. She comes across her best friend's brother, who she was in love with back in the day, and he broke her heart. And now she's in a position where she's staying in the same house as him, and he is completely unavoidable. For me, Cade was like a total turd. Just a complete and total turd. He is 3 years older than the girl in the book. So when she goes off to college, she's like 17 and he's like 21 or 20. But he's like holding her to a standard like she's supposed to be more mature than him. It just drove me nuts. There's major miscommunication vibes in this book. So if you're into the miscommunication trope, this may be for you, but for me, it's a hard pass. It was a hard pass. Okay, the next book that I read was called Falling in Love by Erin Branscombe. Hopefully I'm saying that correctly. This one I gave a 2.5 out of 5, and Spice I gave it a 1 out of 5. This one follows Beth, who's a struggling romance author who's going through a very hard time and trying to process some trauma, and she stumbles into a small town. She ends up basically getting free room and board in exchange for working at this small inn in the town. And the innkeeper is a single gentleman who she cannot help but be attracted to, but she is determined to not fall in love with the job, the town, or the man. This book was just not for me. It had the right concept, so I wanted to read to kind of find out what had happened in this woman's life, because they just kind of give you little breadcrumbs in the story, but they don't really like fully dive into it. So it was enough to keep me invested, but other than that, it was just awkward. Like, awkward is the best word that I could use to describe this. I don't know if it was me. I don't know what it was. The dialogue was incredibly awkward in this book, so it just was not for me. It did have like all of the autumn vibes and stuff, so if you're not super picky on what you're reading or whatever and you just want the autumn vibes, this one might have been for you. Okay, the next book that I read was called A Witch's Guide to Fake Dating a Demon, and this is by Sarah Howley. I don't know if I'm saying her name correct either. This one I gave a 4 out of 5 for stars, and I gave a 2 out of 5 for spice. So this one follows Marielle, who is a witch who is struggling with her power. She accidentally summons a demon, and he is determined to get her to negotiate a deal with him where he gets her soul and she gets whatever her wish is. This is the perfect autumn read. Like, if you're looking for like witchy vibes and stuff like that, this book is for you. First of all, I don't want this to sound like a spoiler because the storyline is nothing like it, but it had Encanto vibes. If you like the movie Encanto, a lot of like the underlying themes and vibes that are happening in Encanto happen in this book. I just thought it was adorable. I loved the banter between the two characters. I loved the background characters. I loved the town. The only reason it wasn't a 5 out of 5 is because there's some like over the top moments and some cheesy lines, but overall solid read, totally worth picking up. The next book that I read was called Neon Gods by Katie Robert. This one I gave a 4 out of 5 stars, and for spice, I gave it a 3 out of 5. This one follows Persephone, and she has just been promised to marry Zeus. And Zeus is notorious for killing his wives. So she knows that she needs to get out of the situation, but her mother is the one who arranged it. So she has no choice but try and flee her city, and she flees right into the arms of Hades, who is not supposed to exist. This book was a wild ride. Okay, first of all, I got sucked in like the first like 3 paragraphs of this book. The concept is so cool because it's like Greek mythology set in a modern time, and I just got completely sucked into this book. I loved the characters in this book. The only thing I didn't like about it is the middle of the book gets very dry to me. So that's the only reason why it wasn't a full 5 out of 5. This is incredibly spicy. So if you're uncomfortable with spicy scenes, this would not be the book for you. But I just felt like it was really like such a refreshing and new way to tell a story. I just thought it was really cool. The next one I'm going to talk about it very briefly. This was called The City Bakers to Country Living, and this was by Louise Miller. I normally do not go on GoodReads if I don't finish a book and give it any type of a rating, because I don't feel like that's fair if I have not finished a book to rate it. But on this one, I made an exception. I gave it a 1 out of 5. I didn't even make it into the 3rd chapter of this book. The woman who is the main character in this book was in a relationship with a married man, and she knew he was married. There was no good reason for the relationship. It wasn't because she was in love with the guy or anything like that. But whatever, I can get past that because there's morally gray characters all the time, okay? What I cannot get past is at the end of the 2nd chapter, she is drunk. She got drunk at a bar. She gets in her car and is like, oh, I can't drive. She reads 3 text messages and then goes, oh, that sobered me up, and then goes to drive. I was so upset, and I don't feel like I'm a super sensitive person because it's a book, you know what I mean? It's not like it's actual real life, but to me, if the author is so cavalier with something so serious, I cannot continue supporting that book. So I ended up asking Amazon for a refund on my digital copy of that book and returned it to Amazon. That's how much it bothered me. It would be one thing if that was like central to the story in any way, but it wasn't. It just literally was like she was a jerk who didn't care and selfishly got on the road after drinking. Next up though, I read A Pumpkin and a Patch by Jennifer Peel. And this one is the first book in a series that I think is written by different authors, which I always love that. I think it's cool that they kind of get together and do some type of a collaboration. This one I gave a 4 out of 5 on the stars, and then I gave a 0.5 out of 5 on spice. So it's almost completely clean, like almost closed door romance on this one. So Josie has spent her entire life trying to run from a story that she wrote back when she was a teenager. It was a spicy pirate romance, and the subject that she based this book on is now fighting her in court on behalf of her ex-fiance as his lawyer. Then he has the audacity to show up in her classroom the next week with his daughter in tow, and it turns out she's going to be teaching her. This one, I don't have like too much to say. Okay, it was a solid autumn read. The characters were cute, the lines were overly cheesy, but just overall, if you're trying to vibe out for autumn, this would be a solid option for you. The next one that I read was called Happily Haunted Afters, and this was by Brittany Kelly. This one I gave a 3 out of 5 stars and 1 out of 5 on the spice. This one follows Emma, who is basically a hot mess and has gotten to a stage in her life that she's just not comfortable with. So she has spent the better part of a year stalking this property on realtor websites that she is convinced she would be able to turn around. She decides to turn to her ex-best friend Jack to see if he would possibly consider investing in her project. Turns out Jack is also looking at that property, but for completely different reasons, and he doesn't want Emma to know about it. So I enjoyed this book, and it's kind of like cool because there's super spooky vibes to it. There's some kind of like almost paranormal things happening in the background. But I just never liked the characters. Like, I did not like the characters at all to even really be too invested in what happens in the story. And I just felt like a lot of it was way too over the top, and their relationship never felt very genuine. Okay, the next book that I read was called My Roommate is a Vampire by Jenna Levine. And this one I gave a 4 out of 5 on the stars, 1 out of 5 on the spice. So Cassie is an artist who's working a bunch of jobs just to try and scrape by. Her and her best friend discover an ad of a guy who's looking for a roommate. The price of the rent is a red flag, but she's desperate enough to take a look at it. And when she meets the guy and sees his place, she starts to think that he might not even be from this century. So this one is a very quirky and witty book. I loved the banter between the characters. I loved how different and unique this story was. It's got like a gothic feel to it. I felt like the writing was very descriptive, and I felt like I was in the vampire's apartment, basically. It's definitely like over the top. There's a mission that's kind of happening in the background that I feel like it gets dragged out and then kind of rushed. So the timing on it was a little awkward to me. But overall, for this time of year, this is definitely a solid read. Okay, so the next book that I read was called Just Don't Fall by Emma St. Clair. This one was a 5-star read for me. I do want to mention that 5-star when it comes to either Christmas or fall reads, we're talking like Hallmark level here, you know what I mean? But if I walk away with like butterflies in my stomach, I'm gonna give it a 5. This one is a clean romance, so there's 0 spice in this. It is closed door, just flirting and I think some kissing, but no spicy scenes at all. So if you're into more closed door romance, this one would be for you. And I would definitely recommend. This follows Parker, who is a social media manager for a hockey team, and her job is about to get a lot more difficult because they're getting a new player who is anti-social media, and she has to figure out a way to get him on board. When he shows up, she realizes it's her brother's ex-best friend and the man who broke her heart. I had a smile on my face the entire time that I was reading this book. I felt like the characters were so special, especially Parker. Parker is the main female character. I just loved her so much. I loved the connection between the two of them. I loved the book boyfriend. I loved the way he treated Parker. I loved the way they dived into different things that were happening in the background. They both kind of had family situations happening that I felt like the author did such a phenomenal job diving into. It's not strong on the fall vibes, so if you're looking for like a fall romance that you could read any time of year, this could be read any time of year. This could even be a winter romance because of the hockey situation, because there's a lot of like ice rink situations happening, so this could also be a good winter read as well. Okay, the next book that I read was called The Summer I Saved You by Elizabeth O'Rourke. 5 out of 5 stars. Spice was a 2 out of 5. Elizabeth O'Rourke is one of my favorite writers, and I don't feel like enough people talk about her. She's a spicy romance writer, but I feel like she brings in deeper topics and just handles it so well. This book is a very fast read, and it follows Lucy, and I would recommend looking up trigger warnings on this one because she has been in a very toxic relationship with her husband, and she's finally found the courage to leave. She shows up to her beloved aunt's lakefront cabin that was left to her to try and start a new chapter, and her next door neighbor turns out to be the boy that she was in love with when she was growing up, visiting her aunt at this cabin. Then she shows up to her new job and finds out that the man is also her new boss, and he wants nothing to do with her. For me, this book was just so beautiful. The thing that I love the most about Elizabeth O'Rourke is I feel like she doesn't waste a single word in her writing. When you're reading her book, every single word has a purpose, and I feel like she brings out every single emotion there is and then wraps it up in such a beautiful way. I always love the timing. I just love everything about how she writes. This one is definitely filled with some heavier, frustrating topics. There's a lot of frustrating moments to get through, but I just love this book so much. Please go binge read some of Elizabeth O'Rourke's books because she's fantastic. They are spicy though, so just proceed with caution if you're not into spice. Okay, the next book that I read was called Return Billionaire to Sender, and this is by Anika Martin. I had read that other book earlier in this video that we talked about, the Billionaires Fake Fiance or whatever, so this is part of that series. This one though, I gave a 2 out of 5 on stars, and then Spice was a 1 out of 5. So this one follows Noelle, and she's a letter carrier, and she is determined to convince a very grouchy billionaire not to tear down her apartment building that her and all of her friends live in. When she goes to go try and confront him, his staff mistakes her for an emotional intelligence coach. So she ends up getting the floor with him, but now she has to figure out how to navigate this new situation of pretending to be a coach. The idea on this book was so cute, but it was just so awkward. Like, it was just awkwardly done. I couldn't get into this book. And I feel awful, but it just wasn't for me. And that's all I'm going to say on that. Okay, the next book that I read was called Tempt Our Fate by Kat Singleton. And if you remember earlier in this video, I talked about Rewrite Our Story, which is part of this series. Didn't like that one, loved this one, gave it a 5-star, and for Spice, it was 2 out of 5. I lied too, 2.5 out of 5. This one follows Pippa, and if you remember from my summary of the first one, she had recently lost her mom. Her best friend's the one that came to visit in the first book. She had recently lost her mom, and so she's just feeling kind of down, and she is trying to focus on the business that she had recently started. But she keeps bumping into this very grouchy man named Camden. He's from the city, and he represents everything that she cannot stand. This book had me completely enchanted. That was the best word that I could use when I walked away from this book. I truly felt like I had been transformed and plopped down in the middle of this fake city or town or whatever it is. It's a town. I just felt like I was walking down the streets while reading this book. I don't know how else to describe it. It was just phenomenal. It was an enemies to lovers situation, which is my favorite. I felt like the enemies to lovers was handled really well. I loved the way that Pippa is like the town sweetheart, but when it came to Camden, she was giving it to him as much as he was giving it to her. She wasn't scared. She wouldn't back down for him, and the banter was just so good. And the grand gesture was top notch. It was like a little crazy. It also had like Gilmore Girl vibes at one point to it. So if you like Gilmore Girls, there's like a town meeting situation that kind of had Gilmore Girl vibes, but I just loved it. It was such a good book. The next book that I read was called Mr. Big Shot by R.S. Gray. R.S. Gray has quickly become one of my favorite writers. This one I gave a 5 out of 5, and for Spice I gave a 2 out of 5. So this story follows Scarlett, who is finally stepping into a role that she knows she's destined to have at her family's law firm. However, she keeps being told by everybody in her life that she's not cut out for it. Her father, though, decides to go to one of the other partners at the law firm and ask him to take his daughter under his wing. Well, Hudson is that partner, and he decides that he is going to show Daddy's princess that she is not meant for the job, but she just might prove him wrong. When I walked away from this book, I don't know how else to describe it, but the whole book just made sense. Like, it just made sense. I loved this book. It was set in a law firm, but it didn't feel cold like a lot of books feel like when they're discussing a law firm. Also, like the father in the story, he's like a, founding partner at a law firm, but he was just a big teddy bear, and I just freaking loved him. I loved Hudson's family too. So Hudson is supposed to be like this grouch in the story, but his family was just the most adorable family. Also, Hudson's secretary in this book, her name is Lucy. If you read this book, can you just confirm with me that Lucy is like one of the best characters ever written? She was freaking hilarious. Like, this book was just so witty and funny and just great. Like, Could not recommend it enough. As of right now, this book is also on Kindle Unlimited, and I could not recommend it enough. Okay, the next book that I read was called Lunar Love, and this was by Lauren Kung Jessen. This one I gave a 4 out of 5 for stars and 1 out of 5 for spice. So this follows Liv, who's recently been promoted to CEO of her family matchmaking company called Lunar Love. It's been in the family for 50 years, and it was founded by her beloved grandmother, who uses Chinese astrology in order to make matches. Well, she finds out that there's going to be an app released that's also based on Chinese astrology, but they're using it more as a gimmick and not using the actual Chinese traditions, and she's very upset. Then she finds out that she's already met the man that's running the company. For me, this book was set in Chinatown, and I just love books that are set in Chinatown. I don't know what it is, but I just feel like that hustle and bustle of like walking along the street with like the, with like all the fruits and stuff out on the street. I don't know what it is, but I just love books that are set in Chinatown because I just can feel myself immersed in the situation. It took me a long time in this book to get warmed up to the characters, but I think that ends up being what I loved most about it because they were unapologetically themselves. And the female character in the book comes off incredibly strong, but then I feel like over the course of the book, I came to appreciate that about her because I don't think she should have to make herself smaller in a situation. And it felt kind of like female empowerment by the end. You know what I mean? So I loved that part of it. There's a lot of like cheesy factors to this, and there's a lot of stuff that kind of feels like, I don't know, it could have been developed a little bit more, but overall, I just thought this was a beautifully written book. Okay, the next book that I read was a thriller, and this was The Only One Left by Riley Sager, or Sager, we'll go with Sager. This one I gave a 4.5 out of 5 stars. There's no spice in this one whatsoever. This one follows Kit, who is a caregiver who has been on a 6-month hiatus because of a situation that happened with a previous patient. When she gets back to work, her boss is required to let her go back to work because she's been cleared of everything in the situation, but he sticks her on a job that he knows she's not gonna like. Okay, so with thrillers, I don't like to dive too much into my thoughts because it would obviously give spoilers away. For me, the thing with Riley Sager is that there's usually like way too many twists and turns. In this one, there's definitely a lot, so that's why it wasn't a full 5 for me, but I felt like this one is probably my favorite of his books. This is a very creepy book. Very like horror movie vibes to it, almost like a gothic vibe. It's also set back in the 70s. It's just got very creepy vibes. So I read it during the day, but there was like a gloomy afternoon storm happening. I felt like that was perfect. You may be the type that can actually read like an adult at 11 p.m. and be fine and still go to sleep. I would have had nightmares. But I did not want to put this one down. Like, I was chasing the ending on this one. So this is a very solid thriller. The next one that I read was called Hester. And this one I gave a 3.5 out of 5 for stars and 0.5 out of 5 for spice. This one is kind of like a historical fiction, but there's like a romance element to it. And this one follows Isabel, who has set sail to Scotland with her husband, who happens to be quite a bit of trouble, and she didn't realize until after she married him. As she's walking around the town and getting to know the people in Salem and trying to promote her business, she keeps running into this one man who intrigues her and starts to tempt her in ways that she knows a married woman shouldn't be. This book is supposedly based on The Scarlet Letter, which I have not read, but I felt like even if you haven't read The Scarlet Letter, this book would still be intriguing. The first like quarter of the book I felt like was the strongest for me, and then it kind of just dies off after that. It was definitely a unique story. There's a lot of situations that are happening, a lot of historical elements, a lot of very key parts of history that are happening in this book. If you're into like Salem witch trials and things like that, you would probably love this book. There was just a lot happening and there was so many elements to it, and I felt like sometimes it felt unfinished because we were jumping from one topic to another. So I never felt like I got the full conclusion on the other one before we're skirted off to the side. Okay, the next book that I read was called That Second Chance by Megan Quinn. We only have a few left, by the way. Thank you guys for sticking around. This one is a spicy romance. This I gave a 4.5 out of 5 stars, and for spice, I gave it a 1 out of 5, which is surprising for Megan Quinn because she's usually a pretty spicy writer. So this one's following Ren, who has just recently moved to a town in Maine, and she had a very close call about a year ago during a car accident and decides that she needs to shake up her life. When she gets to Port Snow, she immediately gets into a car accident and has to call local emergency personnel to come out and save her. The man that shows up has had a loss of his own and immediately feels drawn to Ren, but is trying to hold himself back because he feels like his past could cause her further harm. This book was just, you gotta read it. It was set in a coastal town. The setting was so adorable. The characters were so adorable. The town itself was so adorable. I loved this book. I loved the love story. I loved the timeline of the situation. I loved the character development that happens. I just loved everything about it. I loved the families and how they're involved in the story. I just loved everything about this. This is a solid read. Take it from me. This is one that you should add to your list. The next one was Out on a Limb by Hannah Bonham Young. Hopefully I said all that right. And this one I gave a 4 out of 5. It's a spicy romance. I gave it a 1 out of 5 for spice. So this follows Wynn, who is determined to only have casual relationships in her life. She meets a man at a Halloween party at her best friend's house, and they agree to a one-night stand, no strings attached. But unfortunately, several weeks later, she finds a positive line on a certain test and realizes she needs to reach out to this guy so they can figure out their next steps. It took me a little while to get into this book, but once I got into it, I just felt like it was so beautifully written. There was like a really funny, dry humor and banter that was happening between the characters, and also there's like a couple in the background of this, the best friends of the main couple, and I thought they were just hilarious. Like, I just wanted to be around them. I want them to be my friends because they were so dramatic, both of them. Both the husband and the wife were so dramatic and so funny. I just loved them. I also loved that this book kind of dipped into challenges that these characters had experienced in their lives, and I just felt like it was handled so beautifully. So I really enjoyed this book. The next book that I read was actually like a novella, so it's not a full book. The Ayres and the Boy Next Door by Renee S. Clark. This one I gave a 3 out of 5 stars, 0 out of 5 for spice, so it's completely clean romance. This one follows Rosie, who has only one dream, and that's to take over her family's ranch. But in order to take over the family's ranch, she has to get married. So she finds a city boy who is willing to marry her and is fine letting her run the ranch, and he'll just be the husband behind it. This is like a historical romance, by the way, so it's set back when like you had to have arranged marriages and women weren't allowed to do anything and all that. This book was cute. It was, for the length of it though, it felt very long. Like, it felt like it just kept going, and I'm like, this is only like 200 pages. Why does this feel so long? I liked it, but it just never, I don't know. I felt like the idea of it was really cute. I really felt immersed in the town and all of that, but I don't know. I just never could like fully get into it. Okay, the next book that I read was Shucked by Kate Canterbury. This one I gave a 2 out of 5 stars, and Spice was a 1 out of 5. This one follows Beckett, who has just returned back to his hometown because his parents have gotten themselves in some hot water. So he now has to take over their business and also oversee guardianship of his teenage brother. He happens to run into this woman who's setting up shop at the business next door to him, and she keeps getting in his way. Well, he finds out that this infuriating woman happens to be his best friend's little sister that he hasn't seen in years. So he has this growing irritation and attraction with her that he needs to keep in check before his best friend kicks his butt. This book irritated me to no end. The only reason I give it a 2 out of 5 is because Sunny, who's the main girl in this book, she was phenomenal, and I wanted more for her because the dude in this book, Beckett, is a grade A butt face, okay? I am irrationally upset with him because he was a turd back in the day. Like when they were in like high school and stuff, he was a total turd to her about very serious matters. And then now he is even more of a turd, and I felt like he was like gaslighting her. And he was the most bizarre character I've ever read. I don't know who would actually date a man like that. I don't know. But the reason why I kept going, I would have ditched it, is there's a situation that's happening in it that I was actually invested in. I get all the way to the end of the book and they don't even resolve it. So This is a series and there's another brother coming. I'm probably going to read it because I want to know what happens. Also, I read In a Jam by the same author and it's set in that same town and I loved it. So I'm hoping there was just something that me and Beckett, we were not friends and I'll be friends with the next brother. You know what I mean? Okay, and the last book that I read in the month of September was Plot Twist by Erin LaRosa. This one I gave a 4 out of 5 stars, and for Spice I gave it a 1 out of 5. This one follows Sophie, who is a romance author who is approaching a deadline on a contracted book that she needs to turn in. Well, her and her best friend go out drinking and do drunken karaoke, and she accidentally reveals to everybody that she's never been in love and that she feels like a fraud as a romance author. Instead of hiding her head in shame, she decides to get in front of the situation and start a TikTok account trying to figure out why all of her past relationships didn't work. This book was really quick and really adorable. The reason why it wasn't a 5 out of 5 is because I had a little bit of trouble connecting with Sophie because she's kind of like annoying. I don't know what it was that bothered me about her, but it's set in like kind of like a Hollywood family situation. So I don't know if it was like an air of entitlement that she was rubbing me the wrong way or what it was. I just didn't connect with her. But I loved all of the other elements of this. There are some trigger warnings, so I would recommend before reading that you look those up. So this one actually doesn't release until November 14th. So if you're interested in reading it, you'd want to put it on your GoodReads or whatever, because it's not released yet. I got to read it a little ahead of time because the author and the publisher provided me an advance copy in exchange for an honest review. So I appreciate that. Okay, so we're gonna wrap this up now. I'm gonna quickly go through the list of the books that I'm hoping to read in the month of October. I would love it if you let me know down in the comments below what you plan to read in October. Are you gonna read any of the books that I just told you about? Please let me know down below. And while you're doing stuff, why don't you just go ahead and subscribe so we can keep this party going in the future. Appreciate you. These are the books that I hope to read in the month of October. The Long Game by Elena Armas. I'm actually in the middle of it right now and I think it's adorable. The Guest by B.A. Paris. I had also started that one, but as I've mentioned, I'm a wuss. I can only read thrillers during the day, so that's why I'm also reading The Long Game at night. The Lost Apothecary by Sarah Penner. Finley Donovan Rolls the Dice. I'm super excited to read this one. I got an advanced copy of this. This one doesn't release until like next year. So I'm excited to tell you guys whether or not it's good. I definitely plan to read that. It's like a cozy mystery. If you haven't read the Finley Donovan series, I would definitely recommend reading that. The Modern Girl's Guide to Magic by Lindsay Hall. Enchanted to Meet You by Meg Cabot. The Kiss Curse by Erin Sterling. The Pumpkin Spice Cafe by Lori Gilmore. The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches, and I'm probably going to butcher this name, Sangu Mandana, I think is how you say it. Hopeless by Elsie Silver. I'm so excited about this one. Tame the Heart by Ava Hunter. I really like Ava Hunter, so I'm excited for that release. That's a new release. A Court of Mist and Fury. I'm finally going to read. It's Sarah J. Maas's A Court of Thorn and Roses series. I read A Court of Thorn and Roses, and please don't kill me, but I thought it was like a 3 out of 5. But I've heard that the books get better in the series, so I'm going to dive into the second one this month. I got it back from the library. Wrong Place, Wrong Time by Gillian, or maybe it's Gillian McAllister. The Gossip and the Grump by Pippa Grant. I love Pippa Grant, so I'm super excited for that one. And I think that one actually releases on my birthday, so I'm pumped about that. I got an advanced copy of Snowed In by Catherine Walsh, and that releases on November 1st. Please pre-order her book because she is phenomenal. Follow her on Instagram too because she's hilarious. And I just love all of her books, so look her up, read her books. She's awesome. And then lastly, The Mistletoe Motive by Chloe Liese, or Liese, something like that, whatever. You'll notice those last two were Christmas books because I'm trying to get a head start on holiday reads. So then that way I can recommend to you guys and on Instagram what books I think are worth your time for the holiday season, you know? So that is everything. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it brought you what you were looking for today. I hope you find your next best read from this video. If you did, please let me know because I love discussing books. And that's it. I hope you have a magical day. Bye.